Ukraine has developed air-to-air drones, and we have more and more visuals showing us the usage of them. We also have the first Russian mill bloggers actually sounding fairly worried about this advantage from the Ukrainian side, and even being worried about their helicopters. We'll talk about this as well as about international aid for Ukraine, and there is more highly modern equipment coming to Ukraine, as well as more pilots being trained. And we'll talk about the developments along the front line and some international events directly connected to it in this situation report about the war in Ukraine. The Ukrainians have struck again Russian oil infrastructure. They struck oil depots in Rostov and Krasnodar with Neptune surface-to-ship missiles, anti-ship missiles. This is the second time they have been using it, or where we know they have been using it in a ground-to-ground role, not against ships, clearly showing that this is now a viable use for this new Ukrainian missile. They also attacked with drones and supposedly also did damage with it. For instance, in Azov, an oil depot was burning for more than 24 hours, damaging tanks around it because the Russians were not able to extinguish the fire, and the attacks continue to be successful in this regard. Russia is obviously striking back, but no exceptional news in this context. On the northern front, we have news from the area of Vovchansk. Here the Russians managed to extend their control to the east of the town into the tree lines here. We have no additional information about this about those troops that are potentially cut off. From the Russian side, we have claims that the connection is established. Fresh Russian mill blogger reports claim that they managed to connect them. As of now, I have nothing to really prove it, nothing solid to talk about it. On the eastern front, no change that can be reported. Some geolocalizations, but everything inside the respective control so far. So we are not going to waste our time. So we switch directly south of the Seversky Donetsk. Here we have a Russian success in the area of Kamyanka. The Russians were able to advance here, as we can see in a geolocalization, that they managed to advance somewhat in this area into the town here. Kamyanka is right north of Chasiv Yar, and this is now showing Russian troop presence basically in here. The situation overall would probably mean that this should now be under Russian control until here, but it's probably already 2 weeks ago that I told you about that video which showed the Russians crossing over here, even though the Ukrainians claimed they had destroyed the incursion, the troops that did the incursion at that point. We also have fresh visual evidence of the Russians operating southwest of Klishivka here. The Russians were operating down here with one of their turtle tanks. It was struck and taken out and then later captured by the Ukrainians. This showed where the Russians were operating down until here, but obviously it also shows that the area here is under Ukrainian control. At the same time, though, we have a newer geolocalization showing Ukrainian attacks on Russian positions here. This shows that the Russians seem to be in this area. This is, just to compare it, this is here. This is right next to it. So the Ukrainian claim that the Russians somehow would have abandoned Klishivka seems to be fairly certain untrue. We have them now here in permanent position, and it was unlikely to begin with that they would have given up their positions in Klishivka in total. So it seems that Klishivka is mostly under Russian control as of now, at least according to those pictures, which seem to imply that the Russians have a more or less permanent presence in the southwest of the town. Further south, we have a Russian success here at Mayorsk. The Russians managed to advance to the west roughly 700 meters in the tree lines here, and this is actually problematic and fairly significant because this is close to the control line that was, as you can see here, where the front had stabilized after 2014-15, and this region was supposed to be fairly well fortified. With the Russians now pushing through here as well, and obviously increasingly causing the danger of advancing here to the west as well, it shows the problematic situations the Ukrainians are in the area of Bakhmut. We'll switch down to the region of Avdiivka. Here, the Russians have had some success in the area of Novobakhmutivka. They occupied the tree line here and something to the north, so in advance of roughly 300 meters. No big change in situation here, but some advance by them as well. They also advanced at Arkhangelsk. Here they occupied this tree line, so an additional advance for the north in this regard. But we see them, and which is probably more significant, they managed to break into the Ukrainian fortification here, which was one of the cornerstones of the second line after Avdiivka. We can even see it here on satellite pictures, because this is an old position from the Ukrainians, likely dating back to the time before 2022. As you can see, the positions for vehicles, probably an artillery fire base in here, and it was part of the Ukrainian fortification. We see them here in the north, we see them in the south at the trench lines closer to the water, and we see them here in the east. So supposedly there are still Ukrainians operating in the western part of the trench lines, so this is now really close quarter combat, where the Russians have entered the trench line and the Ukrainians might not have fully left it, but should it fall, then Sokil will very likely be lost as well, and it's obviously a big blow to the Ukrainian positions here, having lost this fortification already at that point. Further south, the Russians advanced in the area of Yasno-Brodivka. This is here. We also have a geolocalization of them here, where the Ukrainians strike them with FPV drones. We see it right here next to the water, and we see another one further to the east. Here was the first one, showing us that the Russians are now operating up to here with armored vehicles. So they are right at the outskirts of Yasno-Brodivka at this point in the Avdiivka front. I can keep it short afterwards because I have no changes whatsoever, neither at Krasnohorivka nor at Velika Novosilka, Orikhiv or the Dnipro. I have nothing out of the ordinary from the Crimean Peninsula as well. So we'll switch directly to the troop generation. Here we have a Ukrainian analyst saying that Russia has now 8,000 to 9,000 tubes for the artillery, barrels for the artillery on storage. So the saying about the North Korean artillery munition is always that it's of so low quality, so that the maintenance, the depreciation, the damage to the barrels is higher of the Russian artillery, and obviously the more damaged the barrel is, the more used the barrel is, the more likely is it that it might lead to a catastrophic explosion inside of the barrel, and the more the accuracy of the piece is being reduced. Having 8,000 to 9,000 barrels on stock is obviously good news for Russia in this regard, and according to that Ukrainian analyst, the Russians are newly building 150 to 170,000 shells a month. In total, the production was supposed to be over 350,000, roughly around 400,000, but that was to include refurbishing of stored shells. The analyst also said that the explosives, especially nitrocelluloses, are on short supply. So the Russians, while they might be able to create enough shells for the shells itself to fill them, is still something where they struggle. We have developments from the Ukrainian side as well, and here we can see a Ukrainian drone attacking and taking out a Lancet, as you can see here, which it is about to strike, and we have that from other sides as well. We have it here, another FPV drone hunting a Russian drone as well. This is not the first time, but it's increasingly coming now. And we have here a Russian mill blogger saying that that the Ukrainians, I think this is meant to be a derogatory term for them, have become world pioneers in this component, and they are threatening them and their helicopters, primarily helicopters. And he also mentions, if I understand it correctly, that which is a rumor that is being spread around for a couple of weeks, that they are supposedly having motherships which fly over the border and then release smaller FPV drones, and that they might use balloons to have them carried into their area of operation. Both is fairly intuitive, fairly logical, that you might use other equipment to extend the range of the drones to then allow them to strike further inland. And this seems to be the case in this seems to be in direct connection here. We also have in the political sphere we have some interesting news. Now, defense exports are always foreign policy because the buyer from you is in need of maintenance, and for modernization he is probably much better off with you than trying to do it himself. And this allows nations that have sold weapons to other nations to put certain limits on their usage. This is, for instance, one of the rumors that is being spread, that why we saw when the military staged a coup against Morsi in Egypt that we only saw M60s and not M1 Abrams. It was rumored that this was one of the reasons for this, that they were not allowed to use the M1s and that they were too afraid to use the M1 Abrams for this regard. Here we have now an example. One of the reasons why India is still not positioning itself against Russia, one among others, obviously, is that the majority of its military equipment is sourced from Russia and the Soviet Union, be it the MiG-29, the Sukhoi 30 MKI, be it their T-72 and T-90 tanks, their BMP-2s, artillery, they've got a lot from them. They have transport planes, they have reconnaissance planes, a lot of their equipment. I read at one point 70% of their heavy equipment is sourced from Russia. They even had the opportunity to lease nuclear submarines from Russia in the past, so they are highly dependent on the Russian military and on the Russians for their military. Should the diplomatic situation between them worsen, then their whole defense of their country might be in danger as well. This is one of the reasons why defense exports are foreign policy as well. And here we have another strategic shift being in development. This is not the first time. The Indians already bought, for instance, M777 from the US, but here it seems now that they will ditch their BMP-2 IFVs for Strikers. Now, obviously, IFVs are one of the most numerous and most important heavy equipment inside of an army. Switching there to an American supplier, which will also include domestic production, is a strategic shift that is increasingly developing from the Indians when it comes to their relationship with Russia. It would be far too early to say that the Indians would break with the Russians, but they clearly, this is one of the opportunities they are taking to allow for more strategic flexibility by no longer being completely dependent on them. We've seen them buying Rafale, for instance, one of the other options before they already had Mirage 2000. All of these are examples where the Indians try to slowly move away from their dependence on the Russians. The other political event is obviously that Putin is in North Korea right now to probably negotiate additional weapon deliveries. It is rumored that he's going to in return give the North Koreans a lot of technology. One of the rumors is the technology for nuclear submarines. We are living in a world now where a member of the World Security Council is doing a state visit to the archetype of a rogue state that is under sanctions for decades, visiting that state to ask for ammunition and in return giving military high-tech. This is the world we are currently living in. And in international support, we have news that Rheinmetall is now building the Sky Ranger on Leopard 1 hulls. That is being reported. This should be a Leopard 2 hull, if I'm not completely wrong. But nevertheless, this is basically a jerry-rigging, a quick production run for the addition to give Ukraine additional air defense systems. Obviously, it's much easier to build just the turrets without the hull, and here Ukraine will soon, in a certain time, probably 1.5 years, will have more air defense, self-propelled anti-air in their arsenal. Interesting part is also that KNDS, Krauss-Maffei-Wegmann and Nexter, the German-French new company that was created out of the two, they are now talking that Ukraine will receive 54 RCH-155. RCH-155 is Germany's wheeled artillery and the only one in the world that can shoot while on the move. Ukraine was the first buyer. Initially in 22, 18 were bought from Ukraine. In 2023, another 18 were announced to be given to Ukraine, and recently Pistorius talked about artillery for Ukraine, so it seems that another 18 were promised and ordered for Ukraine. Realistically, though, the delivery of these last 18 will probably only begin after 2027 unless the production volume goes up massively. The first ones are not to be expected before the end of the year, maybe early next year. So while this is the step in the right way, that the artillery is being increased, it's clearly not enough as of now, as we all know. France has said they are going to train 26 pilots until 2026. So in the next 1.5 years, they plan to train 26 Ukrainian pilots for modern fighter jets. And from Switzerland, we have the news that they are not receiving the ordered Patriot missiles, as the US say they'll have to wait. The first missiles are going to Ukraine. And finally, we have, that was Biden had announced that. That was my mistake. Biden had announced that he would other nations might have to wait, and this was Switzerland, one of them. It was on a different bullet point, and as you know, I only have bullet points, not a ready script, so that led to me saying the final news. So this was already the final news. Not too much has happened over the last 2 days. That is of a bigger volume. Obviously, the biggest news is probably that Russia goes to North Korea and is begging for ammunition there for technology that is a century old, and will in return likely hand over nuclear submarine technology, maybe modern fighter jets, maybe modern air defense systems, ICBM capabilities, things like these, all in return for artillery shells, because Russia's war is Russia is struggling to supply its army with enough ammunition, and North Korea is one of the potential sources for it. So Putin has to negotiate eye to eye with a state like North Korea. These are the strategic partners Russia has by now. If you like this report, please give it a thumbs up. It really helps with the algorithm. Leave a comment what you think about the current Russo-North Korean summit. And if you're new here, I would like to invite you to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss future videos. This channel is only possible because of the support of viewers like you. If you like to support the channel, you can do so by the means in the description. But that's it from me for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back.